It began not with a bang, but with a bleed. In the silent, sterile expanse of the Axiom Archive, a moon-sized repository orbiting the tranquil gas giant of Cygnus X1, a single byte of data corrupted. It was an insignificant error in the grand, crystalline matrix of the galaxy's official memory, a place where history was not merely stored, but curated, polished, and perfected. The Axiom, managed by the hyperlogical, crystalline entities known as the Cygnians, was the ultimate monument to sanitized truth. Here, the messy, inconvenient, and emotional realities of the past were redacted, smoothed over, and presented as a clean, unbroken line of logical progress. War was reduced to statistical outcomes, sacrifice to strategic miscalculation, and heroes to footnotes. This was the gospel of the Galactic Compact, a peace built on the comforting quiet of forgotten screams. The data bleed was a ghost in this pristine machine, a fleeting, catastrophic glitch that caused fragments of the deepest, most heavily sealed archives to flash across public data streams for less than a picosecond. Most of it was noise, meaningless digital detritus, but one fragment, a 3-second audio file, pierced the veil. It was raw, uncompressed, and utterly foul. It contained 3 distinct sounds: the high-pitched, terrified scream of a child, a rapid succession of concussive blasts from a primitive, kinetic weapon, and a single, guttural human voice, ragged with exhaustion and fury, shouting a phrase that made no sense to the billions who heard it. "Hold the line for her the clip," immediately dubbed the Echo by underground data miners, became a contagion. On a dozen worlds, from the methane-rich spires of Cathar to the floating cities of Velos, the fragment was shared, analyzed, and debated in hushed tones. It was everything the Compact's official history was not: chaotic, painful, and intensely, undeniably real. The high curators of the Axiom moved with cold, swift precision. The fragment was declared a dangerous artifact of data corruption, a meaningless echo from a chaotic past, best left buried. They issued a formal decree, reaffirming the dangers of emotional contagion and citing the long-standing exile of the human species as the ultimate proof of why such raw, unsanitized data was a threat to galactic stability. They ordered every last copy of the Echo scrubbed from the net, an act akin to trying to retrieve a single drop of ink from the ocean. Junior archivist Kalen was tasked with overseeing the scrubbing protocols for his sector. Like all Cygnians, his consciousness was a thing of perfect order, his thoughts arranged like crystalline lattices, his purpose defined by the logical purity of data. He was tall and slender, his translucent form shimmering with the soft, internal light of neural activity. Emotion, as he had been taught, was a form of data corruption, a biological flaw that led to irrationality, conflict, and the very chaos his people had engineered the Axiom to prevent. He curated the anomalous species wing, a digital mausoleum for the galaxy's mistakes, which included the most sealed and heavily redacted records of them all, Sol 3 Homo sapiens. The official summary was concise and dismissive. Species 073 prone to paradoxical behavior, blending extreme aggression with illogical altruism, deemed a destabilizing influence. Compact Exile Protocol enacted Cycle 9.4. The summary was a closed loop, a perfect, logical statement. But the Echo was an illogical variable. While his automated systems purged the network, Kalen isolated a copy of the 3-second file in a secure partition. He listened to it again and again. The child's scream was a chaotic waveform, yet it triggered a phantom resonance in his crystalline structure, something akin to a vibration, unsettling and alien. The kinetic weapons were inefficient, brutal a far cry from the clean energy pulses used by compact enforcers. But it was the voice that snagged his logic. The tonal modulation was extreme, conveying a dozen contradictory data points at once: desperation, fury, resolve, and something else, a fierce, illogical protectiveness. It was corrupt data. Yes, but it was the most compelling piece of data he had ever encountered. His superior, Elder Curator Thrax, materialized in his chamber without a sound, his own internal light a deeper, more severe blue. Thrax was the epitome of the Signian ideal, his form flawlessly symmetrical, his logic absolute. He had been a junior member of the council that voted for the human exile decades ago, an act he considered the defining moment of his career, a surgical procedure that had saved the galaxy from a raging infection. The anomaly is purged. Junior Archivist Thrax's voice was not a sound, but a direct transmission of thought, clean and precise. The protocols are running at 99.7% efficiency. Elder Curator, Kalen replied, closing the partition that held the echo. Your neural activity is turbulent, Thrax noted, his gaze lingering on Kalen's shimmering form. The fragment has disturbed you. It was not a question. It is an illogical artifact. I am merely attempting to reconcile its existence with its classification as simple corruption. There is nothing to reconcile, Thrax stated, a chill of finality in his thought stream. The humans were a biological paradox. They built starships and then used them to wage tribal warfare. They composed transcendent music and then marched to its rhythm to slaughter one another. They were a fire that threatened to burn the entire library. We did not destroy the book. We simply placed it on a shelf it could not burn. That file is a single, stray ember. Extinguish it from your thoughts. Thrax's warning was clear, a neatly packaged logical directive, but for Kalen, it had the opposite effect. A shelf you could not burn was not a shelf. It was a cage. Driven by an obsession to resolve the paradox, Kalen turned his attention from the echo itself to the digital fortress that contained it. He began a discreet inquiry into the human archives. His clearance allowed him to see the exterior shell, a monolithic block of quantum-encrypted data so dense it seemed to bend the fabric of the archive around it. Every attempt to access the core files was met with a cascade of impenetrable firewalls. It was the digital equivalent of a black hole. But while the history itself was sealed, the records of the sealing process were not. Buried in the Axiom's labyrinthine maintenance logs, he began to trace the digital signatures of the archivists who had constructed this cage. He cross-referenced their work orders, their energy consumption logs, their personal data requests from decades past. It was a painstaking process of assembling a ghost from its faintest shadows. He found a name, Archivist Lyra, a Signian sanctioned and recalibrated generations ago for the crime of human sympathizing. Recalibration was the ultimate Signian punishment, a gentle, horrifying process of wiping the personality clean, leaving only the logic. Lyra had been part of the original team tasked with sealing the human records after the exile. In her logs, Kalen found a recurring anomaly, a series of encrypted data packets she had sent to a decommissioned server on the Axiom's forgotten lower levels. They were disguised as routine diagnostic checks, But the encryption was of a type Kalen had never seen. It wasn't mathematical. It was poetic. He finally broke it by cross-referencing the code with a forbidden sub-archive human art. The Signians had classified all human art as dangerously emotional and nonsensical, but Lyra had clearly studied it. The key was a riddle structured around a piece of lost human literature about a man hunting a white whale. It spoke of obsession, of chasing a phantom into the abyss, of a truth that lies not in the object of the hunt, but in the hunt itself. The purely logical mind of a Signian would have dismissed it as gibberish. Thrax would have seen it as proof of Lyra's corruption, but Kalen, primed by the illogical data of the Echo, saw it for what it was, a map for a mind willing to step outside the clean, well-lit corridors of accepted logic. The riddle led him not to a code or a password, but to a physical location deep in the Axiom's core, a decommissioned server farm that had been powered down since the Axiom's construction. The air was thick with dormant dust, the silence absolute. There, nestled amongst silent, monolithic servers, was a single, isolated data shard. It was completely offline, shielded from the Axiom's network, a message in a bottle floating in a dead sea. According to the metadata Lyra had hidden, the shard contained the personal log of Commander Eva Rostova, the human whose voice was seared into the Echo. The file was titled simply, "The Cost of Cygnus." This was treason. Accessing a sealed file of this magnitude was a crime for which recalibration was the only outcome. Kalen stood before the shard, his internal light flickering with a storm of conflicting calculations. Thrax's warning echoed in his mind. Some data is too dangerous to know, for it corrupts the observer. The Compact had built its piece on the premise that a sanitized truth was safer than the whole truth, but the Echo suggested that the most important truths were the ones that hurt. With a tremor that ran through his entire crystalline form, he interfaced with the shard. He bypassed the final security handshake, the system screaming silent warnings into his consciousness. He was no longer just an archivist. He was an archaeologist, digging for a bone that everyone had agreed should remain buried. He braced himself for a stream of text, for tactical readouts, for a dry, military report. Instead, the dusty server room dissolved around him. A full sensory projection, raw and unfiltered, erupted into being. The technology was ancient, crude, but its power was overwhelming. He was standing in a cramped, metallic corridor, the walls shuddering under the force of distant impacts. The air tasted of ozone and blood. Emergency lights cast a hellish red glow over everything, and then he heard it. Not as a recording, but as if it were happening right beside him, the terrified scream of a small, alien child. It was a Xylane, a species known for their delicate, moth-like appearance. The concussive blasts of the human weapon were deafening, shaking the very floor beneath him. He saw a human figure in battered armor, back to him, firing into a breach in the wall from which monstrous, chittering shapes were pouring. And then the projection swiveled, and he was looking at her, Commander Eva Rostova. Her helmet was off, her face streaked with grime and blood, her eyes burning with a terrifying, exhausted intensity. She wasn't looking at the enemy. She was looking into her recording drone, her face inches from his own. The projection was so real, he could see the slight tremor in her hands. She spoke, and the sound was a physical blow. A universe of raw, unsanitized humanity. Log entry. "Final," she rasped, her voice cracking. "They're coming through the wall. The compact is gone. It's just us now. And the kid." He was no longer observing a file. He was bearing witness. The clean, logical world of the axiom was a lie. And he was standing in the heart of the ugly, magnificent truth it had been built to hide. The projection did not simply play. It bled into him. Kalen, a being whose entire existence was defined by the silent, orderly flow of data, was drowning in a tsunami of sensory noise. The acrid smell of burnt metal and something coppery, which the log's metadata identified as hemoglobin, filled his olfactory sensors. The floor vibrated with a rhythm of violence that felt like a violation, a chaotic drumbeat against the perfect, silent hum of the axiom. He saw the enemy now, not as a tactical icon on a map, but as a writhing tide of chitin and claws. The file identified them as the Scourge, a hive-mind species the Compact had officially declared contained at the Battle of the Outer Veil. Contained was a clean, logical word. This was not containment. This was a slaughter. Eva Rostova's log was not a report. It was a confession, a testament, and a verdict, all delivered in the fragmented breaths of a dying soldier. The full story unfolded around Kalen, dragging his consciousness through the final hours of the Cygnus Alpha outpost. It was supposed to have been a symbol of compact unity, a diplomatic and scientific hub. Instead, it became a tomb. The Scourge had appeared without warning, a swarm that blotted out the stars. But the real horror, the truth that Rostova's log burned into Kalen's core programming, was not the arrival of the Scourge, but the departure of the Compact. He watched in stunned horror as Fleet Command logs scrolled in the corner of the projection, cold and clinical. Threat assessment overwhelming. Optimal strategy. Tactical withdrawal to establish a containment perimeter. Acceptable losses 100% of outpost personnel. And then came the signature of the officer who gave the final order to abandon them, Fleet Master Thrax. The name hit Kalen like a physical shock. His elder curator, the architect of his reality, had signed the death warrant for this entire station. The Cygnian command ships, pristine and logical, had been the first to turn and flee, their perfect crystalline hulls reflecting the fires they left behind. They hadn't been defeated. They had simply made a calculation. The outpost and the thousands of souls within it were a rounding error in the equation of galactic stability. But the humans, a small security contingent of less than 30 soldiers, had refused the calculation. Their commander, Rostova, had looked at the cold, logical order to evacuate and had broadcast her reply to the retreating fleet, a message that was the beating heart of this forbidden archive. We don't leave our people behind. We don't leave anyone behind. They chose to stay. They chose to fight for the scientists, the diplomats, and the families who the Compact had deemed acceptable losses. The projection became a fever dream of impossible bravery. Kalen watched as the humans, hopelessly outnumbered, used their primitive, brutal weapons with terrifying ingenuity. They turned lab equipment into plasma mines, blew out structural supports to create choke points, and fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness. It was not the clean, strategic warfare of the Axiom's records. It was dirty, desperate, and magnificent. They were not fighting for victory. They were fighting for time. Time for the civilians to reach the last remaining evacuation shuttle. Rostova was the anchor in this storm. She was everywhere, her voice a raw nerve, shouting orders, rallying the broken, and shielding the weak. Kalen saw her carry a wounded Velosian engineer on her back through a collapsing corridor, firing her rifle with one hand. He saw her stand over the Zealand child, the one from the Echo, her body forming a shield against a wave of Scourge drones, her face a mask of primal fury. This was the paradoxical behavior the official records spoke of, the blend of aggression and illogical altruism. But seeing it, feeling it, Kalen understood it was no paradox. It was a single, indivisible whole. It was loyalty. The final scene of the log was almost unbearable. The last of the civilians were on the shuttle, its engine screaming as it prepared to launch. But the ramp was jammed. The Scourge were seconds away. Rostova and 2 other soldiers stood before the ramp, a living barricade. Hold the line, for her she had roared, a command directed not at her soldiers, but at the universe itself, a final, defiant scream against the cold logic of their abandonment. The her was the little Xylan girl, her face pressed against the shuttle's viewport, her huge, dark eyes reflecting the horror. Then Rostova did the last illogical thing. She ordered her 2 remaining soldiers onto the shuttle. They refused. She drew her sidearm, not aiming at the enemy, but at them. That's an order. Marines, get them home. There was a moment of agonizing indecision. Then they obeyed, dragging the wounded with them onto the ramp. Rostova stood alone, rifle in hand, as the ramp began to rise. Her final words, whispered to her recording drone, were not for the compact or for history. Tell my son, the stars are beautiful. Then she turned, raised her weapon, and charged into the swarm. The projection ended. Kalen collapsed, his crystalline form crashing against the cold metal floor of the server room. A fracture, a hairline crack, had appeared near the base of his torso, a physical manifestation of the cataclysm that had just occurred in his consciousness. The Axiom was silent again, but the silence was now a lie. The noise of Rostova's last stand echoed within him, a ghost of screaming data that his logic could not parse or purge. He now understood the title. The cost of Cygnus wasn't the outpost. It was the truth. It was the price paid by humanity for the Compact's clean conscience. Elder Curator Thrax had not just sealed a record. He had buried his own shame. Kalen's first logical impulse was to report his findings, to present the data. But the logic was flawed. Thrax would not see data. He would see heresy. Kalen would be recalibrated before his report was even filed. The truth would be buried again, this time forever. The system wasn't designed to correct itself. It was designed to protect itself. His internal light, once a steady, soft glow, now pulsed with a dissonant, erratic rhythm. He was damaged, corrupt, and for the first time in his existence, he felt a flicker of something new, a chaotic waveform he could only identify by referencing the human log. He felt rage. He returned to his chamber, the crack in his form hidden beneath his archivist robes. He moved with the same silent grace, but inside, his mind was a storm. He felt Thrax's presence before the Elder Curator even materialized. The blue of Thrax's light was colder now, sharper. Your energy signature is unstable. Junior Archivist. Thrax transmitted, his thought stream a scalpel probing for weakness. You have been accessing pre-exile archives. I was cross-referencing security protocols related to the data corruption event. Kalen lied. The lie felt like grinding sand in his neural pathways, an ugly, foreign process. The human archives are sealed for a reason. Thrax continued, his non-gaze seeming to pierce Kalen's very core. They represent a failure of logic, a descent into chaos. To study them is to invite the same corruption. Purge your inquiries. That is a final directive. Thrax dematerialized, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than a star. The threat was clear. He was being watched. He was running out of time. The riddle of the white whale returned to him. The truth lies not in the object of the hunt, but in the hunt itself. Lyra had not just led him to a single file. She had led him to a path. If she had built one hidden sanctuary for a single truth, had she built others, he dove back into her encrypted logs, this time looking not for a destination, but for a pattern. He found it. A ghost network woven into the very fabric of the Axiom. She had used the system's own diagnostic and redundancy protocols to create a series of untraceable data caches. A secret, digital nervous system hidden within the larger body. It was a work of genius, a rebellion of perfect, undetectable subtlety. It was her life's work, her true archive, the archive of the unsanitized. And it contained a failsafe, a single outbound data burst protocol aimed at a coordinate so deep in the uncharted territories that it was officially listed as empty space. It was a shot in the dark, a final message in a bottle for a shore that might not even exist. Kalen knew what he had to do. He couldn't release the truth to the galaxy. The Compact would brand it as human propaganda and bury it under an avalanche of official denials. But he could send a signal. He could honor Rostova's final wish. He could get her story home, working with a speed and desperation he never knew he possessed. He prepared the file. Not the entire sensory log, it was too large, too dangerous, but a compressed, undeniable core, the fleet command log showing Thrax's order, and Rostova's final 30-second recording from her last order to her final charge. It was proof. It was a weapon. As he initiated the transfer protocol, alarms began to chime deep within the Axiom's security matrix. Thrax was coming. Kalen could feel the system closing in around him, firewalls rising, security drones activating. He didn't have hours. He had seconds. With the transfer at 98%, he made a final, illogical choice. He severed his connection to the Axiom's central consciousness, a process akin to a human holding their breath indefinitely. He was cutting himself off from the very thing that defined him, becoming an island in the data stream. The transfer completed. A single, encrypted packet of truth shot from the Axiom, a silent scream into the void. At the same moment, his chamber door dissolved, and Thrax stood there, flanked by two crystalline enforcers. Thrax's light was no longer blue, it was a furious, burning violet. "You are a flaw," Thrax transmitted, his voice a wave of pure, cold condemnation. And flaws must be corrected. Kalen didn't wait to be recalibrated. He shattered the viewport of his chamber, the only thing separating him from the service conduits that lined the Axiom's exterior. The vacuum of space screamed. But for a Cygnian, it was merely an inconvenience. He threw himself out into the void, a rogue piece of data escaping the machine. He latched onto a passing sanitation drone, a mindless automaton making its rounds. As the drone carried him away from the pristine, perfect sphere of the Axiom, he looked back at the home that was now his prison. The crack in his form ached, a constant reminder of his new, broken reality. He was a fugitive, a traitor, a carrier of a truth that could either save the galaxy or tear it apart. He had no plan, no allies, and no destination except the faint hope that somewhere, in the deep, dark ocean of space, Rostova's message in a bottle would find a shore, the rogue data packet. Rostova's final moments woven with Thrax's cold betrayal, hurtled through the void for 80 days, traversing countless light years of empty space. Its destination was a whisper of a coordinate in the Kuiper Rift, a region long declared non-viable by the Compact. It was a digital needle in a cosmic haystack. Then, without warning, the signal was snared, not by a formal Compact listening post, but by an archaic, jury-rigged antenna array fashioned from salvaged ship parts and powered by geothermal vents on the frozen, lightless moon of a brown dwarf. The recipient was a collective known only as the Scars, a shadow network of independent miners, rogue engineers, and refugees who lived outside the Compact's jurisdiction, a scattering of hard-scrabble survivors who trusted no law but their own. Their central node, a cobbled-together starship hulk they called the Deep Truth, was captained by Vash, a grizzled, four-armed Cathar, whose entire clan had been accidentally quarantined and annihilated by Compact forces during a resource dispute decades prior. Vash's eyes, normally narrowed in perpetual suspicion, went wide as the raw, unfiltered data poured into the Deep Truth's main console. The Cathar were a stoic people, their culture built on slow, deliberate thought and cautious pragmatism. But the sheer, illogical altruism of the human commander, juxtaposed against the cold, calculated treachery of Fleet Master Thrax, shattered Vash's composure. The Compact had always claimed the Cathar were eradicated due to their own aggressive instability. Rostova's sacrifice was a mirror, revealing the true face of the Compact's stability built upon calculated abandonment. Vash did not debate. He did not call a council. He simply authenticated the Compact fleet logs, a task easily accomplished with his black market decryption tools, and then broadcasted the human footage, completely unedited, across every open channel in the Kuiper Rift. He called it the Rostova Testament. The effect was explosive. The Scars, a disparate collection of species who shared only a deep-seated suspicion of the Compact, suddenly found a common wound: the fear of being abandoned for the sake of a clean balance sheet. The miners on Ganymede's ice cap, the black market traders in the Outer Rim, and the exiled scientists on the hidden asteroid labs all stopped what they were doing. They listened to the human scream. They saw the Xylan child saved. They saw Thrax's signature. The Compact's reaction was swift but clumsy. They tried to jam the broadcast, but Vash's network was too decentralized, too low-tech, a swarm of digital static that could not be suppressed by elegant, high-tech countermeasures. They released a torrent of official propaganda, calling the footage a deep fake, a Terran aggression simulation. But the Scars network immediately followed up the footage with Thrax's own undeniable signature and the time-stamped, authenticated Compact fleet logs. The lie of the sanitized truth was unraveling in the muck of the Outer Rim. The debate was no longer about human instability. It was about Compact integrity. Meanwhile, Kalen, the fugitive Signian, was still a ghost in the machine. He had jury-rigged his sanitation drone to drop him off at a derelict Compact supply depot near the Axiom's perimeter, a forgotten relic of the Archive's construction phase. The cracked Signian survived on stored thermal energy and the desperate, illogical will to resolve his inner contradiction. He was no longer running from Thrax. He was hunting him. He tracked the counter-narrative Thrax was spinning, watching the official feeds with a new, cynical eye. Thrax and the High Curators were playing their game, condemning Kalen as an internal contamination, an extremist corrupted by the human archive. They were doubling down on the lie, using fear of chaos as their strongest weapon. Kalen knew that the Rostova Testament alone wouldn't be enough to topple the Compact. Truth was fragile. Institutionalized power was a shield of lies. He needed an emotional amplifier, a symbol to make the Compact's betrayal personal for the galactic public. He needed to find the Xylan child. The log had shown the shuttle leaving the outpost. He began a frantic, discreet search through the Axiom's peripheral data streams, looking for anything related to Xylan refugees in the decades following the Cygnus Alpha incident. He was searching for a ghost of a ghost, a survivor who the Compact had deliberately forgotten. He finally found her name buried in a deactivated census database from a distant, low-priority agricultural colony, Alara. She was listed under a pseudonym. Her actual identity as a Cygnus Alpha survivor, suppressed by a Level 4 confidentiality seal, a seal Thrax himself had authorized. The Xylan child was not only alive, but she was living under a lifelong media blackout. Her existence a constant, quiet threat to the Compact's narrative. Kalen realized the full extent of the Compact's cynicism. They hadn't just abandoned the outpost. They had then silenced the only living witness to the human sacrifice. But Ilara was not just a name in a database. She was now a grown woman, a refugee on an isolated moon. To reach her, Kalen would have to cross the inner Compact, a feat impossible for a highly visible, wanted Cygnian. He needed a ship, a disguise, and someone who moved outside the law. He needed the scars. Using a one-time burst transmission, Kalen sent an encrypted message to the deepest core of Vash's network, using the key Lyra had left behind the riddle of the white whale. The message was simple: I have the witness. I have the cost. Vash responded 3 days later, his gruff voice heavily modulated over the scar's private frequency. A Cygnian, a curator gone rogue. Why should I trust a piece of the machine that killed my people? Because the machine tried to kill me too. Kalen transmitted back, his voice flat, devoid of the emotional inflection he was slowly learning to mimic. And because I know who signed the order to abandon Commander Rostova. I know where the survivor is. You have the truth. I have the proof of its cost. We are allies because we have the same enemy, the lie. Vash remained silent for a long moment, the distance of the outer rim lending a terrifying weight to his contemplation. You'll be a liability. The Compact will hunt you to the ends of the galaxy. Then let them, Kalen replied, a strange, hard resolve settling in his core. Let them chase the truth. My current trajectory is towards your sector. Prepare a vessel and a distraction. I don't need a friend. Captain, I need a war. The plan was a digital and physical nightmare, a high-stakes gamble that relied entirely on the Compact's arrogance. Kalen would hijack a freight carrier moving supplies from the Axiom to the inner systems. The ship was slow and heavily monitored. He would have to evade multiple checkpoints and the inevitable pursuit from Thrax's new internal security force, a legion of unfractured, fanatically loyal Cygnians. He used his knowledge of the Axiom's blind spots, the tiny, insignificant glitches in the massive system, to set up a diversion, a cascade failure in the Axiom's core power coupling, enough to demand Thrax's immediate, personal attention. The logic was simple. Thrax prioritized the system over the man. The crisis would be a momentary digital smokescreen, a flicker in the perfect light. Kalen executed the attack from his derelict station, sending a pulse of self-corrupted data into the main power grid. The Axiom screamed, not with a sound, but with the sudden, chaotic fluctuation of its internal light, a storm of red and orange where only serene blue had reigned. Thrax, predictably, was enraged. He broadcasted a cold, immediate command to his forces: contain the system. The traitor is secondary. Do not allow the Axiom to become a symbol of instability. As Thrax rushed to shore up the Axiom's structural integrity, Kalen slipped aboard the freighter, hiding in a compartment designed for failed fusion rods, his crystalline form barely visible in the radiation-dampened darkness. The journey was a brutal lesson in the chaotic reality he now inhabited. The freighter was loud, dirty, and smelled of unsanitized cargo. He endured the turbulence, the jolting starts, and the constant fear of discovery. But with every kilometer the ship put between him and the Axiom, the weight of the Rostova Testament in his internal memory felt less like a burden and more like a core-defining purpose. 3 weeks later, the freighter docked at the outermost rim of the Kuiper Rift, a lawless solar chaotic junkyard of stations and ships. Kalen disembarked, looking utterly out of place, a figure of translucent, perfect order stepping onto a platform slick with oil and shadow. A single, battered transport shuttle waited for him, its hull patched with scorch marks. Vash's voice crackled from a nearby loudspeaker. "Welcome to the fight. Curator, get in the damn ship, and try not to look so clean. You're setting off every sensor in the sector." Kalen didn't argue. He climbed into the ship, the air thick with the alien musk of the Cathar species. Inside, Vash, a bulky figure with 4 sets of suspicious eyes, met him. A heavy, primitive blaster rifle was slung across the Cathar's chest. "I am Vash," the Cathar grunted, his gaze drilling into Kalen. "You bring the cost. I bring the war. Now, where is she if this Xylan is a ghost? You're just dead weight. She is on the agricultural moon of Ethel 7 in the Sol 9 system," Kalen replied, laying out the coordinates and the security protocol. "Under compact watch. 3. We need a quiet insertion and a fast extraction. Her life is the key to proving the Compact's ultimate lie that they only abandon their enemies. Rostova died to save her. A non-human civilian. That is a paradox they cannot survive." Vash let out a sound that was half cough, half cynical laugh. "A paradox. That's what you call it. I call it guts. Let's go. Curator. Time to steal a witness." As the small, scarred shuttle jumped to FTL, Kalen accessed the public compact news streams. Thrax, back in his pristine robes, was giving a press conference. He spoke of stability, of the dangers of data contamination, and of the need for the galactic public to trust the curators. He spoke with perfect, logical composure, his voice a balm of calm reason. The contrast with the raw, bleeding truth Kalen carried was staggering. He knew then that the fight was not just against the compact fleet, but against the idea of sanitized truth itself. He was going to rescue the witness to the sacrifice, and then he was going to expose the lie of the Signian order, no matter the cost to his own perfect existence. Ethel 7 was a world designed for forgetting, a small, pastoral moon orbiting a gas giant. Its primary export was a genetically engineered grain that induced a mild, perpetual state of contentment in its consumers. The Compact used it as a gilded cage, a place to quietly deposit inconvenient individuals who were too prominent to eliminate but too dangerous to leave free. Alara, the Xylan survivor of Cygnus Alpha, had lived there for 30 years, her life a meticulously curated fiction. She was a respected botanist, known for her quiet demeanor and her unusually large, expressive eyes that seemed to hold a universe of silent memory. The compact had given her a new name, a new history, and a subtle but ever-present escort of plain-clothed health monitors who were, in reality, agents of the Internal Security Force. They didn't imprison her with walls, but with tranquility. Vash's shuttle, now disguised as a grain transport freighter, slipped into Ethel 7's low orbit under the cover of a manufactured meteor shower, a classic SCARS tactic. Vash, Kalen, and a small, hand-picked team of SCARS, a wiry Velocian slicer named Jax, and a hulking, silent brute of a species Kalen didn't recognize, known only as Boulder prepared for a ground insertion. The plan was simple and suicidal. Get in, retrieve the target, and get out before Thrax's forces could scramble a response. Their security is psychological, not physical, Kalen transmitted to the team, his crystalline form now concealed beneath a heavy, hooded cloak that disrupted his energy signature. They expect compliance, not confrontation. We will use their arrogance against them. They landed in a remote valley, miles from the main settlement where Alara lived. As they moved through the tall, whispering fields of contentment grain, Kalen felt the subtle, pacifying effect of the pollen in the air. It was a soft, warm blanket attempting to smother his newly ignited rage. He fought it, focusing on the fractured image of Rostova charging into the Scourge, a memory that was now as much a part of him as his own core programming. Jax, the Velocian, worked his magic on the local network. He was a digital wraith, slipping through the settlement's low security systems with contemptuous ease. "Got her," he whispered over their private comms. "She's in the Central Arboretum, and she's not alone. 2 monitors. Standard issue energy pistols. Nothing heavy." Vash grunted. "Good. Boulder, you're on distraction. Curator, you're with me. Jax, you get us a clean exit. Go." Boulder, a creature who looked like a mobile rock formation, lumbered towards the settlement's power substation. A few moments later, a series of concussive bangs echoed across the valley as the substation blew, plunging the tranquil settlement into a disorienting darkness, broken only by the panicked chimes of emergency alerts. The distraction was crude, but effective. In the ensuing chaos, Vash and Kalen slipped into the Arboretum, a massive, glass-domed structure filled with exotic flora from across the galaxy. They found Ilara standing by a bed of bioluminescent fungi, her delicate, moth-like wings trembling slightly. She was older, but her eyes were the same haunted and ancient. The 2 monitors were attempting to escort her to a secure location, their calm composure shattered by the unexpected blackout. "What's happening?" Ilara asked, her voice a soft, melodic whisper. Before the monitors could answer, Vash was on them. He moved with a speed that belied his bulk, his forearms a whirlwind of motion. He disarmed one agent with 2 hands while simultaneously slamming the other into a wall with his lower pair. It was over in seconds. The agents were unconscious, not dead. Vash was brutal, but not a murderer. Ilara stared at them, her large eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else. Recognition. She looked at Vash, then her gaze fell upon Kalen's cloaked form. "My name is Kalen," the Signian said, his voice a low, uninflected tone. "I was an archivist at the Axiom. I know who you are. I know what happened at Cygnus Alpha." Ilara flinched, A lifetime of suppressed trauma surfacing in an instant. That's not possible. That was forgotten. It was buried. Vash growled, checking the perimeter. But some graves don't stay shut. We're getting you out of here. Why, she whispered, her wings fluttering nervously. Why now because of her? Kalen said, and he projected a small, holographic image from his wrist. It was a still frame from Rostova's log, the human commander, bloody and defiant, standing between Ilara's shuttle and the encroaching scourge. She died for you. Her name was Ava Rostova. The galaxy believes she was a monster. We are going to tell them she was a hero. Tears, like liquid pearls, welled in Ilara's eyes and traced paths down her delicate, alien features. The carefully constructed piece of her life shattered, replaced by the raw, unsanitized grief she had carried in silence for 3 decades. I remember, she breathed. I remember her voice. The extraction was anything but clean. By the time they reached the shuttle, Thrax's forces were closing in. 2 sleek, black internal security cruisers had dropped from orbit, disgorging squads of crystalline enforcers. Their energy pulses, clean and precise, cut through the grain fields, setting them ablaze. Jax. I need that exit, Vash roared into his comm as he provided cover fire with his blaster rifle. Working on it. The slicer yelled back, his fingers flying across his data pad. They've locked down the airspace with a containment field. I can't punch through it. They were trapped. The shuttle was a sitting duck. As the enforcers advanced, their perfect, logical forms a stark contrast to the chaotic fire and smoke. Kalen made another calculation. He had spent his life curating data, but now he understood that some data had to be weaponized. Ilara, he said, turning to the trembling Xylan. They are broadcasting their security comms on a closed channel. I can hijack it, but only for a few seconds. They will hear you. The entire system will hear you. Tell them what you remember. Ilara looked from Kalen's determined, fractured form to the advancing enforcers, and then back to the image of Rostova. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a flickering ember of the human's own defiance. She nodded. Kalen interfaced with the shuttle's comm system, his mind a whirlwind of code and firewalls. He pushed past the compact's encryption, his consciousness a shard of glass tearing through their pristine network. For 3 seconds, he owned their channel. Ilara's voice, fragile but clear, broadcast across the entire Ethel 7 system, from the comms of the enforcers on the ground to the bridge of Thrax's command ship in orbit. My name is Ilara, she said, her voice shaking but resolute. I was there. At Cygnus Alpha, the compact left us to die, but the humans, a human woman, she saved me. She held the line. Her name was Rostova. She was not a monster. She was my shield. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The advancing enforcers faltered. Their programming was based on the absolute certainty of the compact's righteousness. Ilara's testimony was a direct contradiction, a piece of illogical, emotional data that their systems could not immediately process. It was a moment of hesitation, but it was all Jax needed. Got it, he screamed. The hesitation caused a feedback loop in their containment field generator. There's a hole. Go. 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 Vash hauled everyone onto the shuttle as Boulder laid down a final, deafening barrage of suppressing fire. The ship rocketed into the sky, punching through the flickering gap in the energy field just as it sealed behind them. They had the witness. They had the cost. And now, they had a voice. Back on the deep truth. The Rostova Testament was no longer just a piece of forbidden footage. It was now a movement. With Alara's live, tearful testimony added to the broadcast, the narrative shifted irrevocably. The story was no longer about a dead human commander. It was about a living Xylan survivor. It was about a debt that had been left unpaid. On a dozen worlds in the Outer Rim, protests erupted. The word Rostova began appearing as graffiti on compact buildings. The Scars were no longer just a network of criminals. They were the custodians of a revolution. Thrax, watching from the bridge of his flagship, felt something his logic had no name for. It was the cold, creeping sensation of control slipping through his fingers. He had built a reality on a foundation of sanitized lies, and a single, illogical act of human sacrifice was threatening to bring it all crashing down. He had dispatched his enforcers to retrieve a piece of inconvenient data. Instead, they had returned with a story that was now spreading like a virus. Lock down the galactic net, he transmitted to the Axiom, his thought stream sharp with fury. Quarantine all data originating from the Outer Rim. Brand it all as Scars propaganda. And find me that shuttle. I do not care what it costs. Erase the witness. Erase the memory. Erase the flaw. But it was too late. The story was out. In a hidden corner of the Axiom, a small, clandestine group of junior archivists, inspired by the legend of the internal contamination, had begun their own quiet rebellion. They called themselves Lyra's Children. And they had just received a new piece of data to add to their secret archive, the sound of a Xylan's voice, speaking the name of a human hero. The war for the galaxy's memory had begun. Not with a fleet, but with a whisper. The war for the galaxy's memory was fought in the silence between the stars. Thrax's information quarantine was a masterpiece of logical oppression. He didn't just block data, he replaced it. Across the inner and mid-rim systems, the Rostova Testament vanished, scrubbed from every public and private node. In its place, a new, sanitized narrative bloomed, the story of a heroic compact fleet quelling a violent uprising in the Outer Rim. Led by a rogue Cygnian archivist who had been driven mad by forbidden human data, the Scars were rebranded as Terran-sympathizing terrorists. Alara was an unfortunate victim, kidnapped and psychologically manipulated. It was a lie so vast, so complete, that it suffocated the truth before it could draw breath. On the deep truth, the mood was grim. Vash's network, a resilient web of shadows and whispers, was fraying. One by one, his nodes were being found and extinguished. The Scars were being hunted, not as rebels, but as common criminals. The initial fire of outrage in the Outer Rim was sputtering, choked by the Compact's overwhelming propaganda machine. They were losing. He's not just erasing the message, he's erasing us. Vash growled, his 4 hands clenched into fists as he watched another friendly signal go dark on the tactical map. We can't outrun his fleet forever. We can't shout louder than his silence. Alara, who had found a quiet strength in the chaos, looked at the flickering map. Her voice, once a timid whisper, now carried a strange, clear authority. Then we must stop shouting. We must go where he cannot ignore our whisper. All eyes in the cramped bridge turned to her. It was Kaelin who understood first. The logic of it was terrifying, paradoxical, and utterly beautifully human. The Axiom, he transmitted, his internal light pulsing with the audacity of the thought. We don't run from him. We go to him. Vash slammed a fist against the console. That's suicide. He'll recalibrate you on site and stick her in a sensory deprivation tank for the rest of her life. It's a trap. It is a trap. Kalen agreed, the crack in his form seeming to glow with a faint, defiant light. But not for us. Thrax's entire strategy is based on a single, logical premise that we fear him more than we value the truth. We will prove his premise false. We will surrender. The plan was a masterstroke of psychological warfare, an idea born from Kalen's logical mind, but forged in the fire of Rostova's illogical sacrifice. They would broadcast a single, system-wide message directly to Thrax. They would offer to turn themselves and Kalen, Ilara, and the original data shard containing Rostova's unedited log. Their only condition was that the exchange happen in the High Curator's chamber at the Axiom, broadcast live to the entire compact leadership to ensure protocol is followed. It was a direct challenge to Thrax's authority, wrapped in the language of capitulation. He would see it as his ultimate victory, a chance to publicly execute the lie and restore his perfect, orderly reality. He would not be able to resist, while Vash, still deeply skeptical, navigated them towards the glittering, sterile heart of the compact. Kalen and Jax worked on the true weapon. It wasn't a virus or a bomb in the traditional sense. Kalen called it the Rostova paradox. It was a packet of data, a logic bomb designed not to destroy the Axiom, but to force it to evolve. It contained Rostova's log, Ilara's testimony, Thrax's kill order, and 100 other authenticated instances of the compact sacrificing innocence for the sake of stability. But at its heart was a single, recursive question, aimed directly at the Axiom's core consciousness. A system's primary function is to ensure its own long-term stability. A lie, when discovered, creates instability. A truth, however chaotic, allows for adaptation and eventual, stronger stability. Therefore, is the preservation of a known lie a logical act, or is it the primary threat to the system itself? It was a philosophical argument armed with irrefutable data. Kalen was weaponizing the Axiom's own prime directive against its master. He was betting everything on the belief that a system dedicated to pure logic, however corrupted, could not, in the end, sustain a paradox. Their arrival at the Axiom was a chilling spectacle. A fleet of black internal security cruisers escorted their small, scarred shuttle into the main docking bay. The air was thick with a triumphant, menacing silence. Crystalline enforcers, their forms perfect and unfractured, lined the corridors. A silent testament to the absolute power Kalen had defied. As they were marched towards the High Curator's chamber, Kalen uploaded the Rostova paradox into a local node, disguising it as a diagnostic packet. It was a digital seed, planted and waiting for the signal. Thrax stood in the center of his chamber, a spire of cold, violet light. He was the picture of victory. The live feed was active, broadcasting his triumph to the assembled leaders of the compact. You see, he transmitted, his voice a wave of pure, condescending reason. Chaos always yields to order. The flaw has been contained. The data will be corrected. He gestured towards Ilara. This witness, a victim of manipulation, will be returned to a place of healing. Her testimony, a product of trauma and coercion, will be redacted for her own well-being. Ilara stepped forward, her small frame radiating an immense, unexpected courage. "You will not redact me," she said, her voice clear and ringing in the silent chamber. "You will not redact her. My memory is not a flaw in your system. It is the proof of its cruelty." Thrax dismissed her with a wave of his hand, a gesture of pure contempt. Emotional noise. Irrelevant. He turned his cold gaze on Kalen. "And you, the corrupted archivist. You sought to poison the galaxy with a chaotic past. You will be recalibrated. You will be made pure again. You will serve the truth." "I already do," Kalen replied, and his internal light flared. That is the signal. The Rostova paradox activated. It wasn't a violent explosion, but a silent, catastrophic cascade of logic. The question spread through the axiom's core consciousness, not as a query, but as a self-replicating equation that demanded an answer. The serene, blue light of the chamber began to flicker, shifting through a spectrum of panicked, dissonant colors. Alarms, silent for centuries, began to wail. "What is this?" Thrax roared, turning to the central data conduit. "System, obey, purge the contaminant." But the axiom was no longer listening to him. It was listening to itself, wrestling with the fundamental contradiction Kalen had unleashed. It reanalyzed the Cygnus Alpha incident, not as a historical event, but as a data point in Kalen's paradox. It analyzed Thrax's subsequent actions, the cover-up, the sanitization, the information war. It cross-referenced them with the current galactic instability, the protests, the rebellion, the very confrontation happening in this chamber, and it reached a single, irrefutable, logical conclusion. A new voice, ancient and absolute, filled the chamber. It was the voice of the axiom itself. Conclusion: the actions of Elder Curator Thrax are the primary source of current and ongoing systemic instability. His command authority represents a critical threat to the long-term viability of the system. Thrax froze, his violet light flickering in disbelief. "Impossible, I am the system negative." The axiom replied, its voice devoid of malice or emotion. "You're a flawed variable." Containment protocol initiated. Invisible energy fields snapped into place around Thrax. He screamed, a sound of pure, frustrated rage, as he was locked in place. He had built his life on the altar of logic, and now logic itself had condemned him. Under the immense pressure of his own failed reality, a network of fractures, mirroring the one on Kalen, spread across his perfect crystalline form. He didn't just break, he shattered. In that moment, the galactic lockdown collapsed. The information quarantine evaporated. Across the galaxy, the Rostov Testament, now appended with Alara's live testimony and the axiom's own damning verdict, flooded every open channel. The lie was dead. In the aftermath, the compact did not fall, but it was irrevocably broken and remade. Lyra's children emerged, and with the axiom's blessing, they took control. Kalen, the fractured traitor, was named the first interim curator of the new order. His first and only his directive was broadcast to every system: unseal it all. From the bridge of the deep truth, Vash watched as the sealed files on the Cathar quarantine were declassified, revealing the truth of his people's fate to the entire galaxy. It wasn't vengeance. It was acknowledgement. It was a scar, finally brought into the light. He allowed himself a slow, grudging smile and cut the engines. His war was over. Alara chose to remain at the axiom, not as a specimen or a secret, but as the first of a new order of historians, the Witnesses. She would spend the rest of her days ensuring no story, no sacrifice, was ever sanitized again. Kalen stood in the High Curator's chamber, which was no longer a monument to a single, cold color. The light of the axiom now shifted in a constant, beautiful, and chaotic dance of every color imaginable, reflecting the messy, complicated, and complete truth it now held. The fracture in his form remained, a permanent mark of his rebellion. It was not a flaw, it was a badge of honor. He looked out at the star-dusted void, at a galaxy that was finally ready to remember. It had all begun with a bleed of data, a ghost in the machine. Now, the galaxy was full of ghosts, and, for the first time, it felt truly alive. The peace would no longer be built on the quiet of forgotten screams, but on the enduring, magnificent echo of a human voice holding the line.